I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, Billy, today we have some really interesting guests. It's Kentucky Archaeological Month, and it's also Friday is Native American Day. And, you know, forestry has been around a long time before actually forestry was created.
No doubt. Yeah, before the Europeans arrived, there was forestry stuff going on. And, you know, we've got Dr. Gwen Henderson, who is with the Kentucky Archaeological Survey. She's the education director for them. She's going to be talking about how Native people in Kentucky used our natural resources. So that I'm really looking forward to that. I know some of our guests have, or some of us in our department have worked with Gwen before. I haven't had a chance, so I'm so excited to hear her presentation. It'll be our first time on From the Woods Today. And then a little bit later, we're going to have Jacob Stewart. Jacob Stewart is a private lands coordinator here for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. So basically oversees all of those private lands biologists who are out there working with landowners to, you know, trying to improve wildlife habitat on their property. But Jacob's going to be talking about a cedar harvest workshop that they've got coming up in central Kentucky. So that's pretty interesting. I know we've got a lot of cedar trees here in central Kentucky. So there's a lot of people, Jacob, that'll be interested in hearing your presentation, I'm sure. And then I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple of upcoming programs. We've got a few upcoming programs over the next few weeks we want to alert you all about. So really excited about today's show. Folks, if you're on Zoom, you can interact with us via the chat pod. And if you're on Facebook Live, please use the comments section and get us your questions and we'll respond. But Renee, really excited about today's show.
Yeah, it'll be great. So let's go ahead and get started. Gwen, if you want to go ahead and turn your camera on.
All righty, here I am.
There you go. Welcome to From the Woods Today.
Thank you very much. Let me get my PowerPoint shared here. There it is. Oh,
got it.
Perfect. Isn't it? I'm very pleased to be here today talking about ancient people in the land, how Kentucky's native peoples used native resources. So Kentucky, September is Kentucky Archaeology Month, and you can see our new poster on there. I also want to bring to everyone's attention Discover Kentucky Archaeology. It is a new website that talks about Native American and Euro-American, African American archaeological sites. There's about 115 sites on this website, and it's growing every day. So I wanted to bring everyone's attention to that. And like Renee said, Native American Day is September 23rd. So when she said, Gwen, you need to come and talk, I thought, okay. And she said, well, you need to do it today because of Native American Day. And I was like, okay. So in our conversation, which, you know, was a marvelous conversation, there were so many options to discuss. I didn't know what to do. You know, there's stone resources that Native peoples used for their chipped stone tools. You see some examples here. Well, then there's the clay and the stone that was added to, or the shell that was added to the clay to form vessels. Well, she thought those were pretty fine, but not exactly appropriate yet. I said, well, what about animal resources? Talk about the animals that they hunted and the kinds of things they made from the animal bones. She was like, well, I don't know. Okay. Wood resources. She was all about that and decided that I should talk about that in another presentation. All right. Okay. So I said, well, I could talk about plant resources today. And she said, well, that'd be okay too, but really, this is from the woods today. I would prefer a little more woodsy. So I said, all right, what I'm going to then do is talk about native plant domestication. And you can see Kentucky in the red star, one of the 6 world hearths of plant domestication, and also native impacts on forests. And the thing that binds these two topics together is native use of fire. The kind of fire that I'm talking about is not the debilitating, destructive fire that we hear so much about on the news today in California and other parts in the West. That kind of fire burns so hot that it reduces the trees to ash, it sterilizes the soil. It takes a long time for the forest to return. And I want you all to know, as I'm going through this presentation, as a generalist, I've got my notes here to my left. So it's not, I'm not looking at you, I'm not looking at you guys purposefully because I'm shy. It's just that I want to be sure that I get the information correct for you. Okay, so this is not the kind of fire I'm talking about, these devastating fires. I'm talking about cool fires, which seems like an oxymoron, but there you have it. On the bottom right-hand side of this slide, you can see what I mean by a cool fire. Native peoples lit cool ground fires. Then this way they managed the forest, and they incorporated this fire as they turned to gardening. Now, Native peoples had deliberately set fires long before the time period I'm talking about now, which is a time period of the native gardeners, which goes from 1000 BC to 1000 AD. Those folks would have set fires to perhaps manage animals, sort of get them to congregate in one place so that they could hunt them more effectively, or maybe just to clear out brush and so forth for their camps. But the gardeners set the fires deliberately. And we have archaeological evidence from sites in eastern Kentucky, particularly Cliff Palace Pond in Jackson County. So I'm pulling on information today from the work that was done at Cliff Palace Pond, and you can download a copy of this booklet from the Daniel Boone National Forest's website. I am also including information from Bill Best's book, Kentucky's Seed Saving Heirloom Seeds. What they did, okay, so let me tell you a little bit about these native gardening peoples before I get into how they used the fire and why they used it for their gardening. These are artists' reconstruction drawings of what these people's villages might have looked like. These people, a lot was going on during these 2,000 years. These are also the burial mound builders of central Kentucky. These are the people who likely were the most common folks who created petroglyphs, which you see in the upper left-hand corner. These were the folks who were the initial cavers. They went into the caves of Kentucky to mine the selenite that was a mineral deposit on the walls. And also they made pottery. You can see an example on the lower right. These folks were aware of the power and the usefulness of fire. So notwithstanding the fact that they used fire as a tool to clear out brush and to herd animals, they also knew fire as something that was a powerful element, if you will, for heat, for cooking food, in ceremonial contexts, where you could see something tangible like a log transition into smoke and the power that that represented. So they were not unaware of what fire could do, but these native gardeners harnessed this fire as a tool to open up places in the woods so that they could plant their gardens. If you all take nothing from my presentation today, I want you to take this particular piece of information away with you. That Kentucky has a world hearth of plant domestication. The information present in the archaeological sites in Kentucky, particularly the dry rock shelters of eastern Kentucky, is on the radar of anyone all over the world who studies human beings' movement from hunting and gathering to food production. Kentucky is on the world stage. This is something that we need to know about, and it's really very exciting. Okay, so how did they do it? Well, the tools that they used were fire, which they were familiar with, digging sticks, which you see on the lower right, and also their knowledge. When I say that, what I mean is their knowledge of the environment, their knowledge of how different soils produced different kinds of plants. Remember, these folks live in the environment all the time. They don't, move into their houses and turn on the lights and, turn the water on or anything. Their home, their grocery store, their church surrounds them, and they are intimately aware, must be intimately aware of the resources around them. They also understand the difference between thin soils and thick soils, thin soils on the ridgetops and thicker soils on the floodplains. They understand what slope and aspect means. So they're perfectly familiar with the fact that a southern exposure is a sunny exposure. The plants that they grew, archaeologists refer to as the Eastern Agricultural Complex. And you can see an illustration of some significant examples here on the slide. Native squash, starchy seeded plants like goosefoot, maygrass, erect knotweed, giant ragweed, and little barley, and oily seeded plants, marsh elder and sunflower. How did they know? How did they do this? Let me back this up. How did they do it? They, for generations, had recognized that when they collected wild plants and threw them out in their growing trash heaps, certain plants came up volunteer. Those of you who have gardens and have thrown out a pumpkin from Halloween will know in the springtime you get a lot of baby pumpkins. Same way with tomatoes. These folks noticed this. They selected the plants growing on these heaps. In time, their selection genetically modified some of the plants. So on this slide, the underlined plants are the ones that the seeds were genetically modified by the native peoples as they selected the plants that they wanted to grow, the ones that they wanted to eat. In time, they went from gathering materials, gathering plants, to saving seeds, planting seeds. They watered the seeds. They harvested the plants. They saved the seeds and began the seasonal round all over again. Now, I'm not an ethnobotanist, but I got to tell you, these seeds are pretty cool from an archaeological perspective. So let me share them with you. Also, this is a way that I can show you that these charred plant remains from these dry rock shelters, looked at by archaeobotanists under the microscope, studying them, are providing us this information that I can share with you today. Okay, so here's the native squash. Started out as really thick, really, from a certain perspective, sounds to me pretty nasty. But in time, over time, and I'm not saying, a couple of generations, this took many generations, they modified by their own preference and selection to have thinner walled squash and meatier squash. And when I'm talking, the squash I'm talking about are not like zucchinis and yellow squash. I'm talking about butternut squash, the winter squash, acorn squash. Goosefoot is a lamb's quarters, lives in our gardens as a weed, but these folks turned goosefoot into a crop. And you can see examples of goosefoot seeds, charred goosefoot seeds in the center of this slide. Maygrass, another starchy seed. This one was cultivated, but it didn't have any morphological change. So these are not considered necessarily domesticated, but certainly cultivated. And you can see some example seeds on the lower left. Those little tick marks aren't inches, people. Those are millimeters, tiny seeds. This is why archaeobotanists wear very thick glasses. Erect knotweed just recently, and I say recently meaning within the past 10 years, archaeological research at a site in Garrett County documented the world's earliest domesticated erect knotweed seed. And then we have sunflower. Some of the oldest sunflower seeds domesticated have been found in dry rock shelters in Menifee County. And in the upper part of this slide, you can see what I mean when I say that the domesticated sunflower seeds morphology is changed through the intervention of Native peoples as gardeners selecting the seeds that they want to plant in their gardens. Becoming gardeners means that their life ways have changed now too. Their ancestors were hunters and gatherers, knew the land like the back of their hand, gathered nuts, gathered wild plants. But as they began to manipulate plants, to save seeds and plant them, the gardening meant that they had to stay more tethered to a particular place where their gardens were. And by having a more settled lifestyle, it instituted a whole host of different kinds of changes in Native life ways that profoundly changed Native people's way of life. From a certain perspective, you might consider that the domestication of the plants in time meant the people were domesticated too. I promised that I would talk about Native impacts on forests, though, and let me turn to that now. The information that I'm pulling for this particular section is from Cliff Palace Pond in Jackson County, but also Cold Oak Rock Shelter in Lee County and Cloud Splitter Rock Shelter in Menifee County. We're talking about fire. And I mentioned how Native peoples intentionally set cool fires to open up places in the forest for their gardens. Yes, what I'm saying is there is no virgin forest. Native peoples, through their use of fire earlier, before they were gardeners, but particularly when they became gardeners, and then afterwards when they became farmers. Fire is a tool. Fire impacts the forest. Fire changes species. Fire acts, I don't know, sort of like these little garden patches are kind of like, if you think about it as a forester, when a tree, and of course we all know that forests are living ecosystems. Not the trees will eventually die. The big ones fall over. They open up an open area. More sunlight comes in, and you have new species come in, and this is how the forest remains healthy. Okay, those open areas are kind of like what the Native peoples are doing when they create their garden openings. What they're doing is creating a fine-grained patchwork of vegetation, not just depending on the old trees falling, but they're going into places where they live, near where they live, and they're modifying the environment. Burning the understory, like this cool fire, is opening up areas so that habitat, edge habitat is enhanced. Increased nutrients are turned back into the soil, ash, for example. I don't think it's a far stretch to consider that the Native peoples opening up of the forest in these garden patches, creating more edge habitat, more forest edge environments for the animals that particularly like to live in these kind of forest edge environments, or certainly exploit those. The same animals Native peoples depended on for food. Deer, for example, turkey, for example. But I wanted to give you guys a sense, a visual sense of what these garden patches might have looked like. Well, you know, we can't go back in time. I wish we could, because then I'd have all kinds of pictures, you know, but I don't know. That's not going to happen for quite a while, I'm confident. So the best I could do was to find some pictures of swidden or slash and burn agriculture to give you a sense of what it might have looked like in ancient Kentucky between 1000 BC and 1000 AD. So on the bottom left-hand side of this slide, you'll see a slash and burn plot. It looks kind of scruffy to us, but then we have a different perspective on what fields and gardens are supposed to look like. Native peoples didn't have that problem. Although it wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't some people who were really, you know, serious weeders. You know, there are those, it's a human thing, you know, some people really want order. So what you can see there in that lower left-hand side is what maybe a smaller version of what those garden patches might have looked like. And this would have been multi-cropping. I've talked to archaeobotanists, and they really think it's multi-cropping. They don't think there was monocropping there, meaning, you know, just a whole plot of goosefoot, for example, or just a whole plot of sunflower or something like that. The picture on the lower right is an aerial view taken in, I think it's Indonesia. I think I took it from a photo of Indonesia. This is a picture of what this patchwork quilt of slash and burn agriculture looks like from the air. Imagine that Kentucky's environment, when these native gardeners were really doing their thing, what the Kentucky forests might have looked like, what the Kentucky environment might have looked like. A patchwork quilt of active gardens, gardens that had been, you know, turned, no longer using those gardens, ones that were growing up in forest succession, and then, of course, the mature forests and so forth. But there's also a species change in the woods. Fire-tolerant trees become more, I don't want to say more relevant, but they become more frequent in this diversity that's created by the native peoples making these garden plots. Oaks, black walnut, chestnut, and the fewer fire-sensitive plants like beech and butternut. So when you start thinking about what Smokey the Bear has done to our forests, closing up the canopy, permitting those fire intolerant or fire sensitive trees to take a stronger root, and the fuel load in these forests, because there's no cool fires to keep it in check, you can understand how it is that our forests are a different kind of forest now after the decades of fire suppression. And this is why foresters will tell you that it's important for controlled burns to lessen the load, the fuel load, to enhance those fire tolerant trees, because over the millennia, the ecological balance of certain kinds of animals and certain kinds of birds, mammals, and so forth, and were connected to that forest that had standard human intervention in the forests. And without that standard human intervention, with the subtle changing over time of these species, there will be a change in the animals and birds as well. Okay, so I think it's important for me to show you the archaeological information collected from the Cold Oak Shelter in Lee County. Archaeologists collect information that Native peoples left behind, cultural information. But there's also paleoecological and fire history documented in these rock shelters if you look for it and consider it in the totality. Those of you who might be interested in learning more about this kind of multidisciplinary approach to research, I think would find reading the Cliff Palace Pond booklet helpful. I also think you might find it interesting to take a look at a video that the Kentucky Archaeological Survey did about the research at Cliff Palace Pond. And in that video, the paleoecologists are talking about the research they did at the little pond that carried 10,000 years of fire history, native history, and forest species history. Okay, so at Cold Oak in Lee County, the information collected from there shows that the disturbed habitat plants, disturbed by those gardeners opening up the forests near their sites, near their campsites, opening up that habitat, creating more disturbed area, edge, if you will, over time, over this 1,000-year time frame that we're looking at here, that forest plants became less common at the archaeological site and disturbed plants became more common. And when I say disturbed plants, I don't mean just weeds, because these weedy annuals that the native peoples grew and domesticated, like maygrass and sunflower and goosefoot and little barley, are disturbed habitat plants. And so what this actually shows you is their turn to gardening. This is an important, I think, information for all of us to appreciate. As I prepared my PowerPoint today, I became yet again more aware of the interlinking of cultural history, fire history, environmental history. And just like it's important for me to appreciate the changes in the natural world when I'm studying Native peoples, I think it's important for folks who study the natural world to understand that dynamic relationship between Native peoples in the woods, Native peoples in the plants. When we go out into the woods, those woods have been touched by people, and not just historically, but ancient people too. And by studying how these different disciplines work together, we can get a much, I would say, almost more like a 3D perspective on on Kentucky, natural, environmental, and fire. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them if I can, or I'll write them down and I'll ask my experienced colleagues who are plant people.
Dr. Henderson, cannot thank you enough for your infectious enthusiasm for archaeology and Native peoples and here in the natural resources. You know, here in Kentucky, I think, you know, foresters a lot, we think we have a long-term view, but I think you've shown us maybe our perspective should broaden a little bit for sure. So I can't thank you enough for, you know, sharing that great content. And we'll see if we've got any questions popping up. And I'm not seeing any right now, but if folks do have some, please get them into the chat pod and we'll get with Dr. Henderson here in a second on those. But Gwen, we're going to have to get you back. I know you've got some other good stuff, you know, and, you know, again, trees that can live 300 and 400 years really fell in comparison when we're talking about some of the time frames, you know, that you may be thinking.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things too, Billy, you think to yourself, you know, archaeologists, well, foresters think long-term, archaeologists may think longer term. Then you talk to geologists, right? And they're like, really? You people? Honestly, you think you're talking long-term?
I know, it's all relative, I guess, right?
It is.
Oh.
I noticed in the chat, how does the past inform the future in regard to forest management? Brilliant question.
Yes.
Brilliant question, Chris. The future in regard to forest management, from my perspective, the past informs the future. We need to have more fire in the forests.
Right.
We need to have more fire in the forests. Now, I understand that it's one thing to have native peoples, not a lot of people around. You know, they do their prescribed burn, right? Their cool burn, and it gets out of hand, and okay, it's not a problem. You don't have a bunch of, oh, but now it's a different story. But I think the past shows us how significant the use of fire for management is, but it also shows that we as humans are deeply linked to that environment. Native peoples, we can, if in the 21st century, we think that we're not connected to the environment.
We
Right?
definitely are.
Not
You
so
know,
much.
we are connected to the environment. The environment still shapes who we are, what we eat, how we live, and seeing this dynamic interaction of people and the environment, we could take a lesson from that, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you, Gwen. We greatly appreciate
good
it.
stuff.
Really good stuff. Yeah, we appreciate you being on. And I know I'll have you on again. No problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. All right. So folks, we had a little technical issue, but
Yeah,
Renee's
I
now
will run back to the office.
so she's joining me back here, but we're going to switch gears real quick now. Again, we thank Gwen for being with us, but we want to tell you about a couple of upcoming programs real quick. And then after that, we're going to have Jacob Stewart on talking about the Cedar Harvest Workshop. But I'm going to go ahead and share the upcoming presentation there with you all. All righty. So we want to talk about a couple of programs coming up here in October. And we normally do this the last of the month, Renee, but we thought
Right.
since they're relatively early in the
Early,
month, we
definitely.
want to go ahead and get those. So we're going to go ahead and tell you about a couple of programs. You'll be able to find these a little bit later on our calendars page there, linked. So the first one we want to talk about is the Kentucky Tree Farmer of the Year Field Day. This is a really exciting event, Renee.
Yeah.
UK Department of Forestry and many other organizations come together to try to celebrate the tree farmers here in Kentucky. And we do this by recognizing at least one each year who has done above and beyond, right?
Right.
And Phil Traxler and Laurie Yanishek in Lewis County are certainly that couple. They have done so much great work there. So we invite you all to come out and join us at this field day. It is a free event, but we do ask for pre-registration. If you can get out your handy dandy camera on your phone, you should be able to register right here off of the screen on that little QR code if you get your camera out and take that. But we'll have a nice meal for you. This meal is sponsored by the Kentucky Tree Farm Committee. But again, please register in advance so that we know to have enough food for you. I will let you know that it is mostly a walking tour, not too far to walk, but it'll be mostly flat because we're not going to be able to show you everything on that farm. It's a big farm, Renee, and they've done a lot of work in the back 40, but Bill Knott, the forester that's been working with Phil and Laurie, has basically taken a lot of video footage of some of that work. So we're going to show you some of that. We're going to go see their dry kiln. He's got a woodworking shop, and they've taken a lot of that wood and built a cabin there that you can rent on the property, an Airbnb cabin that's actually beautiful. So
Wonderful.
you'll get to see all of that stuff, and they're just great folks.
Sounds like an interesting day.
It will. It'll be a great day. So come spend the afternoon with us in Lewis County on October 4th if your schedule permits. But again, please pre-register. If you know of others that might appreciate this event, please tell them to come out and join us as well. But let's celebrate Phil and Laurie and inspire others to get engaged in taking care of their woodlands as well. And now the next event I want to mention is the Maple Syrup Farm Tour. So we're working with Jimmy Sizemore, and Jimmy's been on the show a time or two. And, you know, we love Jimmy and all he's done. He's so involved in so many groups. And one of the things he's involved in is maple syrup production. So Jimmy's opening up his farm on October 11th for us to come down and check things out. And we're going to have a tour of his place. He's going to give you kind of a little overview of what he's got going on in his operation. But we're going to have some other folks there, Renee, that talk about some of the financial and technical assistance to landowners that may be thinking about about getting started in maple syrup. And
That could be very beneficial.
it really could. So, if this is something you've been thinking about getting engaged in, we encourage you to join us, especially if you're in the Clay County area, Southeast Kentucky. And again, there's a little QR code. You can go ahead and register for that. We do ask you to please let us know by October 7th so we can take care of food planning, because there is a meal, and that meal's been provided by the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project, kind of the work that we've been doing out of our ACER grant that we were able to get from the Ag Marketing Services. So please join us at that event as well. And then finally, I'll highlight some of the upcoming topics we're going to be talking about next week or next month on the show. We're going to kick off October 5th with National Mushroom Day. And we've got Jack Stickney is going to be with us, and Dr. Ellen Crocker. And then we're going to have Dr. Jacob Muller talking about when disasters strike, and unfortunately,
had a lot of those this year.
Had way too many disasters. And then on the 12th, is Tree Week here in Kentucky. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be celebrating trees every day that week, right?
Exactly.
But we've got a special show on Wednesday here on From the Woods Today, where we're going to be talking about trees and their importance in cities and how we can kind of take care of them. So don't miss that. And then keeping those national weeks going, it's National Forest Products Week the following week, and then we're going to have Chad Nyman with us talking about that. And Chad works really closely with our loggers and our forest industry in the state, and it's such an important entity that we have here in Kentucky. Without those sawmills and stuff, our landowners would have no place to send that timber, right?
Right.
So they play an important role. And then we got a Halloween special coming up. Yeah. I know on October 26th, and we're going to be having our Halloween special. And then we've got a few reoccurring guests. We've got Dr. Jonathan Larson. He's always such a good guest, and he's got so much knowledge in an entertaining way. And he's going to be talking about leeches.
But it is creepy.
It is creepy. We'll have some of the lore associated with them as well. And then we've got Matt Springer is going to be talking about creepy things in the forest. We might have some other creepy surprises for you on the 26th. So make sure to join us at some of these programs coming up in October here in Kentucky.
Definitely. All right. You know what? Our next guest, though, actually is going to be talking about a workshop that they're going to be having. So, all right, just unmute yourself.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I couldn't see my camera and stuff with the way the computer set
up. It looks like we're all having technical
difficulties. Wednesday in Kentucky.
Exactly.
So welcome to the show. We greatly appreciate you being on. And could you tell us a little bit about the workshop that you're going to be doing?
Well, this is kind of my conversation today is going to be kind of on the idea of cedar management for wildlife, leading up to two specific workshops we're having in a focus area, and then just kind of an overview of that. And really, there's a whole lot of this stuff we're getting ready to talk about that Dr. Henderson didn't really realize that she was hitting on it, of how fire and the lack of it causes us to have to manage cedar in Kentucky in different ways that we can do it, fire being one of them. But so I'm going to cover that stuff real quick, and just a quick overview of that, and then some of the workshop stuff. So,
well, Jacob, before you get into that, just remind folks that the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources is really one of our most important partners for woodland owners here in the state. And Jacob, I know you oversee the private lands biologists here in Kentucky, and those are the folks that are available to go out and work one-on-one with woodland owners here in Kentucky and help them manage their property. So, just want to say thank you to you and all of your biologists for all the great work you do, because we know so many of our landowners, they really care about wildlife, right? And many of them have become owners because of wildlife. They want to support it. So Jacob, just wanted to acknowledge you and all of your team for all the great work you all do helping our landowners here in Kentucky.
And I appreciate that, Billy. And then I want people to understand too, is that just because you're a wildlife person doesn't mean that forest management should not be a part of your management strategy for your property. And that's kind of what these workshops are, is kind of introducing those landowners to the idea of how the impact of forest management can help them, specifically on cedar on this aspect. So,
all right, great. Looking forward to it.
All right.
We got you.
Everybody see my screen there?
Yeah, got you.
All right. Well, I'll jump right into it. Again, a quick overview of cedar management for wildlife, and an idea of different types of techniques to manage cedar, and then the quick information on the workshops that we will be having. Just kind of a quick overview of the state of Kentucky. If you look at this map, this is what we call the bluegrass ecoregion of Kentucky. If you'll see here, you have 3 different ecoregions shown here: your central, your hills of the bluegrass, and your outer. The blues and the reds on here are cedar within that area. So you can kind of see on a landscape, this is land cover data from 2019. You can see on a landscape of how much cedar is actually present, and especially in the hills of the bluegrass, which is a more rolling, poor clay soils part of the state. And really what that shows you there is the idea that because cedar is an early invader, that was at one time some kind of disturbance that opened that area up, and it is now being reverted to cedar. So the whole idea here is to talk the process of, okay, I have this much cedar, what do we do with it? Is there value to it? What does it mean to wildlife? What does it mean to forestry? So that's kind of the idea of the workshops and the work we're trying to introduce landowners to and opportunities they have. So this is a typical mature cedar forest in Kentucky. This was actually on Clay Wildlife Management Area up in Nicholas County. So this is an area that we decided to start trying to manage, and an opportunity of maybe trying to create some early successional habitat by managing this stand, because the wildlife value of early successional has kind of dwindled. So we saw this as a low-hanging fruit. To manage it, we decided, there's multiple options. The fire is we'll kind of discuss here in a little bit, but the way we started to manage this one was actually through a timber harvest, a timber sale. You'll see on the left, there is a bobcat that cuts and can stack it, or on the right, you'll see that there's a skidder pulling some of the cedar trees out, and the logger was using chainsaws in a couple of these situations, but feather bunchers and that kind of stuff to get the cedar. This stand right here was a 5-acre stand. They pulled the cedars out. They had a processor that processed them, and you'll see this is all in the same stand that we started with. This is the after. This picture was taken looking the exact same way as the first picture I showed the cedar stand. So you'll see here that we went from a closed canopy forest to which we removed just cedar. The only thing that came out of the stand was cedar, and set it back to an early successional stage, open area, in hopes to create a grassland, and in 2 or 3 different things you could do here. This here was a year after we cut that stand. So you can see a bunch of diversity coming in there, wildflowers, native grasses, that kind of stuff coming into the area. Creates wonderful brood habitat for turkey, quail, bedding for deer. All that is forbs, which is forage for deer. And as well as puts back the diversity that Dr. Henderson was just talking about. They stand, it went too far. Fire was not going to knock back the cedar without some kind of removal. So we came in and removed the cedar, and got wonderful results. This is actually another stand. Cedar is actually a pretty good nurse crop for oaks. In the whole process, the cedar comes in, blue jays, squirrels, find refuge in the young cedar, plant acorns, and a lot of times you'll find as the cedar gets bigger, the oaks will start coming in some of the gaps and eventually overtop the cedar. So we actually just went in here and removed the cedar from within the mature hardwoods, those oaks, to open it back up to create kind of a woodland. Again, we got a nice herbaceous cover now, open it up, and hopefully we can start managing this as either as an oak hickory stand and more so than the cedar. But so that's another their section there on clay we harvested. Sorry for that blurry picture, but that's just a typical small cedar stand. You're not going to necessarily sell. And this is another aspect of cedar management. You can go from selling the cedar to actually managing, so from managing the woods aspect to managing the field aspect. And this right here, I'll show you a quick video of us using a bobcat to clear out. You'll have to excuse the music. It's pretty cheesy, but this is us using the Bobcat to chip out the cedar. This is a time lapse. This was probably 4 or 5 hours worth of work shown in about 30 seconds. But this is just another tool, another management aspect that we use to do this kind of work. This was a result from removing those cedars with the Bobcat. This is not a planted field. If you see all the orange, that's butterfly milkweed and some black-eyed Susans, and you'll see other milkweeds and native grasses coming up in this site. That all we did was clean out the cedar. We chipped some of it. Some of the bigger stuff actually went to Cave Run Lake and was sunk for fish habitat. So trying to use the resource, this is a good example. We got wildlife habitat and fish habitat all with one action. So just another good example of what you can get. And this is the fire aspect that Ellen was talking about, of actually utilizing fire, putting it back on the landscape to help knock back the cedar and hopefully encourage other native plants to come in and take their place. And the fire adapted species that Ellen talked about, your oaks, your walnuts, your native grasses, your forbs, that kind of stuff will come in and fill in the gaps and eventually take this cedar stand over. So basically, because of the lack of disturbance, the cedars come in, the first early invaders. If the Native Americans were around, you probably would have had fire on the landscape more often, and you probably wouldn't have had such big continuous stands of cedar. This is just down on kind of go into the aspect of the work and all this stuff is going to be, I'm kind of covering all this to talk about the workshop and us talking about how we actually help you get through this process. This is us, when you harvest cedar, depending on how size, this was a pretty big unit. I had to create some big brush piles. But with fire, we're able to reduce those down and spread them out and start putting them back into a management routine. So with this workshop, we're going to try to help landowners, show them how they can do some of this stuff and get to the point of fire or using cost share programs to help them to reach their goals. This is another one that I just want to make sure we mention. You can't mention forest management in Kentucky without mentioning invasive species. This right here is the treatment before a cedar harvest of killing out bush honeysuckle. So we went in and sprayed some bush honeysuckle twice before we came in and allowed them to log it. And then we followed that up with either fire or herbicide afterwards to make sure that we're getting the species back that we prefer. Again, this is just another example of treatment, herbicide treatment in invasives and a kill it. So now I'm going to jump right into kind of the workshops. On this picture right here, this is the same type of, this is reds and greens, show the cedar and mixed evergreen forest, deciduous forest across the central portion of the state. You'll see the blue one up top. That's our Mercer County focus project that we're kicking off this year. And to the south, it's a Greene County focus project. We're also kicking off as well with the agency, Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, with its partners, NRCS especially. They've awarded us focus conservation grants to work in these areas, especially the northern one. You'll see how much more cedar is involved in that Mercer County one, to try to work with landowners on managing these areas to help set back succession and just do good management, between removing cedar, prescribed fire, everything above, pollinator plantings, just anything we can do to help try to get this landscape back into kind of knock the cedar back and replace it with some more preferable wildlife habitat. Greene County, it's kind of, there's an opportunity there for us to do cedar work as well. But that one right there is majority for grazing native warm season grasses. But we're going to have two workshops, or I guess informational meetings for those two focus areas coming up. One next week in Mercer County, right here, Willisburg Firehouse. on September 29th. And we really are targeting the people who live in that area. If you live close by, please feel free to reach out and call and come. And then we're having another one October 18th down in Greene County. With both of these are kind of informational meetings that we're going to introduce what the Focus Conservation Project is, that we have the money to NRCS to specifically go towards management in a working landscape in these two areas. That doesn't mean that this work can't be done. We're actually looking, this is kind of a pilot for us to look at the process of helping landowners walk through the process of saying, okay, we have this on our landscape, this type of cedar stand. What are my options? And then once we figure out the options, if it's just a simple fire to knock it back, or a chipper to chip it, or possibly if it's big enough, if there's actually value to harvest it, try to help you knock down the roadblocks to show you the way and lay out a roadmap on how you can get this work done on your property. It's a wonderful opportunity to come in here and actually manage your forest and get some value out of it, as long as not just monetary value, but wildlife value out of it. So these two field days are coming out. So please, if you're in these areas and interested, feel free to call and RSVP. If you're not in these areas, as Billy mentioned, we have 17 biologists across the state that can come help and give you information on everything I just talked about, as far as cedar management, open land management, just in general wildlife management on your property, free of charge. They're all located within NRCS offices to help with cost share that's available to do these programs. So also there's a QR code there. If you scan that QR code, that'll take you to the private lands webpage, which has this map there located, as well as some other information for you all. But with each one of those, also those informational field days, we are going to have bigger workshops in April. So if it's something which we'll probably open that up to a whole lot bigger crowds to come out and see some of this stuff on the landscape and what it looks like, and talk about the process of doing it. Keep in mind that there's not a quick turnaround on any of this stuff. It's important that we come up with a good plan and a strategy, and the whole purpose of this is to walk you through it to try to remove any kind of headaches or hurdles for you to get it done smoothly. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that. We greatly appreciate it. And if you could kind of explain a little bit, what does a private land biologist do?
So a private land biologist is there to provide you information to reach your goals and objectives of your property. Mm-hmm. And when we say he's a wildlife biologist or wildlife management, I don't want people to get the idea that we're just there for the aspect of wildlife. The whole idea is what we're there for is to take all of your goals and objectives for your property and see where we can fit wildlife management in that's not hurting your bottom line. Because let's face it, a piece of property costs money. You have to if there's a resource there that you can use to help offset cost for your daily life, we don't want you not to use that resource. But what we're there for is to help you figure out how you can include wildlife into that. And hopefully there are options like removing cedar that you can actually increase your bottom line as far as profitability by doing it and help wildlife at the same time. So a wildlife biologist is there to help you figure out where wildlife, if that's one of your goals and objectives, how that fits into your management scheme.
Well, it sounds like, that's a topic for another show that I might get you on. What does a wildlife biologist do and how can they help you? So
yeah. And there's all the fire that Dr. Henderson was talking about. I'm also part of I'm the vice president of the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council.
Okay.
So there's also opportunities we're trying to with these focus projects. We have the council has a 8-hour course that we offer to show landowners how they can implement this on their property.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be scary as like it out west. If you put in the right precautions and do it correctly, you can do it safely. And it's a wonderful management tool that, you know, if you can burn it once a year instead of bush hogging, that saves you money, and it actually is better as far as wildlife management goes.
Yeah, great, wonderful. Well, we thank you for being on and greatly appreciate all the information that you've given us.
Oh, thank you for having me. And by all means, call me back and I'll come on. I love to talk. So.
I definitely will. Thank you. All right, folks. Well, you know, we've had a wonderful show today. We've gotten a lot of information done. We've talked about, you know, indigenous people, and then also wildfires, and how about private biologists, and Cedar workshop. And there's just been a slew of information given today. So I greatly appreciate you joining us, and make sure to tune in every day, or I'm sorry, every Wednesday at 11 o'clock on From the Woods Today. We have every show that we've ever done on FromTheWoodsToday.com. So if you ever, you know, want to go, oh, what did Gwen just say? I can't remember. Then you can go back and look at that, and it'll, you can watch every video that we've done there. So you can go to, again, FromTheWoodsToday.com and get all of that information. But, you know, we're done for today. We greatly appreciate you joining us. So have a great week and take care. Bye.
From the woods today.